Barry Trammell with the Oklahoma. Billy, I know you always believe in the process and believe in what you're doing, but when a guy like Paul George comes for a year and then re-ups for at least 3 more, is that sort of an endorsement that, you know, hey, we're doing things right, we're running the kind of organization that we ought to be running?
Well, I mean, I'll let Paul speak to that. You know, my dialogue with him after the season ended, you know, before free agency was really, really positive. I think Paul, you know, probably understood that, you know, coming in last year and so much of the team being new and being an adjustment period, I think he felt good, you know, about his relationship with Russell, the relationship with the rest of the guys on the team. You know, Paul is an easy guy to work with, an easy guy to communicate with. So I think he felt like, you know, just based on, you know, being here for a year, I think he felt comfortable, obviously, moving forward. I think it speaks to his teammates, the organization, everybody all the way around.
Billy, with Russell's surgery, was that something he could have had earlier in the season, or was it just at that point he had to have it at that time?
Well, obviously Russell made that decision. He'll talk about that, but I think for him, you know, he felt like it was the best thing to do at this point in time, and you know, we feel very, very fortunate that it was obviously nothing serious, and he's working hard to get himself back, you know, whenever that time may be.
Hey Billy, do you think with the roster finally solidified this season, do you think that there was maybe a more obvious direction and flow with Paul George and Russell, maybe that there maybe wasn't last season?
Well, I think anytime you have 2 high caliber players like that, there's always going to be an adjustment period that goes on, you know, in terms of getting to know each other, how each other plays, how do you play off of each other. I just think that that's normal. But I think because of, you know, Russell's investment here, you know, over his entire career, you know, who he is as a leader, I think he and Paul really developed a very, very close and good relationship. That I think that they work through those things. So I would say that they're probably at a better place this year, starting the season, than they were a year ago, because they really just didn't know each other in terms of that kind of familiarity. So that part of it I think is positive.
Eric Corney, Oklahoma. Billy, this is kind of a 2-parter. First, your initial thoughts on being able to work with Dennis, getting more time with Dennis than you would have had with, you know, with Carmelo last year. And second, Dennis and Russell together. Those are 2 guys who are very good in pick and roll, like to get downhill. How do you play those 2 styles together?
Well, before the trade ever happened, you know, I had an opportunity to speak with Dennis, and we had some very, very candid conversations. And the one thing I would say, you know, coming from those conversations, is that he's extremely competitive, and winning is a high priority for him. Certainly, we'll have to work through those situations. I think both those guys can play together on the floor. I think they'd both be effective. You know, both of those guys know that one of them is not going to have the ball in their hands as a point guard if they're both on the floor together. But it's going to be, you know, those 2 guys getting familiar with each other, playing with each other. But that would be something that I think that would be something we would need to work on. Obviously, it would be a little bit more challenging with Russell's situation in training camp, maybe not having the opportunity to do that, you know, tomorrow. But I think going forward, when Russell does return, I think that's something that we're going to need to look at, because I think that could be a positive for our team.
Coach, how has Steven evolved in the last couple of years, and then how is that evolution tied to the evolution of the position he plays?
Well, you know, Steven's continued to get better, you know, every year since I've been here. You know, he's obviously an elite defender. He's a terrific roller. I thought last year, you know, his role really kind of, he flowered in it. You know, he did a great job last year, you know, all the way from the beginning, all the way to the end. And I think the things that we needed him to do to impact the team, he really did. So Steven's always been a really good team guy. He's always put the team first, and has always had an attitude of, you know, what can I do to help? What can I do to make the team better? And I thought last year, you know, the way he played from start to finish, you know, he had a terrific year.
Billy, in regard to, you know, Carmelo last year, he was a guy who kind of came, I guess, 2 days before training camp, and you had a plan to have Patrick kind of as that guy starting at power forward. I mean, do you have a bunch of notes left over from when you were putting together your plan for that group? And I mean that by saying that, is it going to be easier for you to go into this season with a guy like Patrick, because you've had time with Patrick and you had a plan for Patrick going into the season last year?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you necessarily always have just an individual plan. It's, really from a team perspective. Obviously it was a little bit different, with Carmelo coming in, in fairness, so close to training camp. I think he got in town the day before. So you always are going to go back and look at notes and look at things to evaluate the season, to evaluate players and try to put them in positions to be successful. But, again, the situation was what it was last year with Carmelo. With him coming in so late, there's really nothing that we could do about that. But again, I've always felt very strongly about Patrick as a player, Jeremy as a player. I think those guys can help us. I think they both complement each other very well. But I don't necessarily think that, looking at last year, things that maybe we wanted to do with Patrick, you still have to look that there are some different players on our team this year, so like what's best for the entire group. We'll have to see how that plays itself out. I'm not going to really talk about that because one is I haven't had a chance to see certainly Dennis on the floor and Timothy on the floor, Nader on the floor. There's different players out there, Nerlens. So we'll have to see how all that works out. I think both Patrick and Jeremy realize and understand that both those guys will be important to our team going forward this year.
Coach, there's reason for optimism about Dennis coming aboard and what all he's done in the past, but there are a couple of questions. His three-point shooting, I think last year was 29%, and he doesn't have a history of being an established elite defender. In fact, some people say much less. Sam had mentioned he's expecting him to be an elite defender. Could you describe what you're expecting in those two areas from him?
Well, I think when Dennis, I remember when Dennis, he was a young player, he's more than capable as a defender. He's got the ability to do that. I think when he probably started off in Atlanta, their team looked drastically different than it did probably a year ago. There was probably an evolution for him, as it related from coming off the bench to starting. So, there's different things that he was probably dealing with, but I certainly feel like he has the ability to be a good defender and has the capability. I mean, earlier in his career, he picked up full court. He was very, very aggressive. He's got really good feet. He's got good hands. He's got long arms. So I believe he can be a very good defender.
Last one here, Coach.
Guys, you probably have time for one or two more questions.
With the three-point shooting, I mean, he's obviously his skill, his strength is to be getting to the lane. But I also think too is him getting comfortable and taking, threes that are within rhythm and good for him. He's got the ability to make threes. I don't want to sit here and say he's been an elite three-point shooter because obviously the stats say he hasn't. But I still feel like for him to do what he does well, he's going to have to take some threes to keep the defense honest, so to speak, so he can create more opportunities to get into the paint.
Last question here.
Coach Chris Lincoln, Oklahoma Sports Team. Billy, what are your main goals going into training camp? What are the questions you want to have answered for this team?
Well, I think the biggest thing for us, if you look at our team last year, and certainly we've got some new players coming in, we were inconsistent in a lot of ways. We've certainly against high-level teams, competed very well. There were some teams that, that maybe weren't, in the realm of maybe being at the playoff level that we didn't perform well against. So I think the biggest thing for us is the consistency part. Consistently playing to a style and an identity that we need to, game to game. I think that starts trying to establish that identity and style of how you want to play tomorrow. And I think that's what we've got to do. We've got to be willing to put the work in to create and have an identity that's going to be something that we can rely on that helps us be a more consistent team than we were a year ago.
All right, thank you, Coach.
Thank you.